All right, great. So why don't we go ahead and get started here? Sorry, one second. Okay, go sit down. One second. Sorry, we have a sick kiddo
No,
home with
I'm
us.
in.
Okay. All right. So first of all, thank you all so much for coming and spending your Monday evening with us and with this great talk that we have with our three friends from the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. Before we get started, I just have a couple of really quick announcements. The first is that we're doing this dialogue series tonight, and we'd love to have you all. And to help make this possible, we're always very appreciative of any donations that you all can make to help us expand our network of speakers and do more of these talks and bring more of this educational outreach to the community. Second, we have our Sustainable Claremont newsletter. I'm going to go ahead and drop this link in the chat box in just a minute here. Again, we have so many tree plantings, Earth Day celebration, Arbor Day coming up, different Green Crew workshops coming up. And so the best way to keep on top of all these things is to make sure that your name is added to our newsletter. We try not to send those out too much, once or twice a month, just to keep everyone abreast of all the great things that are going on in the community. This Saturday, we have a urban forestry workshop that's happening online. And this is with our partners in Rancho Cucamonga and at West Coast Arborists. So if you're interested in a very general workshop on urban forestry and tree care, you can sign up for that through Eventbrite. Again, I'll drop that in the link just after I'm done doing the introductions. And we're also hiring 2 paid interns for this planting season. So if you know somebody who's interested in tree planting and environmental education or outreach, they're paid internships. They're for 40 to 60 hours for the semester. A lot of fun and a lot of great hands-on experience doing great environmental work in the community. And again, I'll drop the link to that in the comments after we're done here. Okay, so quick introduction to our 3 amazing speakers tonight. The first is Terry Grill, who we all probably recognize here. So Terry's a founding member of Sustainable Claremont and has a focus on waste and recycling. Her love in running and hiking in the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park led her to join the Save Johnson's Pasture effort and eventually led the board of the Claremont Hills Wilderness Conservancy, where she currently serves as president. We also have Lissa Peterson here speaking with us tonight. She and her husband Dan moved here in 1974. She founded and directed programs at the Claremont colleges for international students, ran a writing center, and taught courses in academic writing and English for international students for more than 30 years. Soon after she arrived in Claremont, she and her husband discovered the joy of hiking in the foothills, especially Johnson's Pasture. So in 2003, when she learned that a new organization named the Claremont Wilderness Conservancy had formed, she signed up. And she's been a board member ever since and was president for 6 years. Lastly, we have Arlene here speaking with us. She's a member of the board at the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy. She's also a member of the League of Women's Voters, Claremont Heritage, was a member of the Planning Commission, and was the senior city planner for the city of Laverne. We're so thrilled to have the 3 of you speaking with us tonight. Terry, I'm going to go ahead and throw the hosting powers to you. Here we go. And so you can share your screen. Typically, when we do these dialogues, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and Terry, Lissa, or Arlene can respond in real time as they see them, or they can wait to the end and I'll collect the questions as they come in, and I'll be able to relay those back to make sure that we get to everyone's questions or comments. Okay, I'll stop talking now, and Terry, I'll let you have the stage.
Thank you, Stuart. And I did not stop sharing. So is it invisible, Stuart?
Sorry, Terry, you cut out there for a second. Can you say that again?
Is my screen visible?
It is, yeah, we can see it.
Okay,
great.
All right, so Arlene is going to start. So please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm Arlene Andrew, and member of the board of Claremont Wildlands Conservancy. And today, Lissa Peterson, Terry, and I are going to tell you about the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. I'll talk about the background. Lissa will discuss the expansion in the master plan, and Terry will talk about the future. Up until 1997, except for a 40-acre parcel called Sycamore Canyon, Undeveloped hillside land north of the flatlands of Claremont was in private hands. Today, 2,500 out of 3,100 hillside acres are within the boundaries of the park. How did this change come about? Well, this is the story of how Claremont gradually expanded north to the hillsides and how the Wilderness Park evolved. In the beginning, abundant hillside plants, trees, animals, and water helped indigenous populations flourish before colonists came and displaced them. In the late 19th century, with the arrival of the railroad and establishment of colleges and towns in the area, local students and residents started venturing up to the hillsides. The C.C. Johnson family, who had purchased hillside land, picnicked and hiked there. And later, Claremont residents planted flowers and trees on what became known as Johnson's Pasture. Nearby property owned by the Gale family flourished as an Angora goat ranch, and you see those goats off in the corner of the slides. Claremont, for decades, was confined to the town site around the railroad depot, but gradually grew north to Foothill Boulevard, seen in the lower right-hand corner of the photo. It arrived in Claremont in 1931 through the efforts of Frank Wheeler, called the grandfather of Foothill Boulevard. The high school, Claremont High, is off to the right in that photo. Housing in the hillsides was initiated in 1925 by H.H. Garner, who developed the Padua Hills neighborhood. His intention was to build an elegant community fostering artists and not, in Garner's words, a honky-tonk place. In 1930, he and his wife, Bess Garner, established the Padua Hills Theater that you see in the photo. As Claremont grew, the flatlands between the town center and the hills were planted with vast acres of citrus trees. By the 1950s, development was creeping north and the city was growing, but the hillsides remained unincorporated county land. Now, a little about city policies. The city's leaders saw a need to establish rules to steer future growth in a manner acceptable to its citizens. So, in 1956, they adopted a general plan. General plans are meant to encapsulate a city's vision for its future and to establish foundational policies and programs. They cover topics such as housing, open space, circulation, and many more. State law requires a city's zoning and other ordinances to be consistent with the general plan. Several large hillside parcels were annexed to the city in the mid-1960s. A dense hillside development at the top of Mountain Avenue named Claraboya shocked Claremont residents into the realization that the hills could be covered with housing if something wasn't done to control development. So you see that photo on the right, that courtesy of the Courier. Claraboya is now a fine neighborhood of mostly mid-century modern homes with spectacular views, all the more special because it is the only such neighborhood in Claremont. Johnson's Pasture, immediately north of Claraboya, was to be Claraboya Phase 2. The mid-1970s owners, American Savings and Loan, attempted unsuccessfully to receive approval to build 356 houses there, based on the zoning at the time of 2 dwelling units per acre. The map on the left shows the layout of Claraboya lots, and the arrow above points to Johnson's Pasture. According to city historian Judy Wright, the hillsides could have ultimately been developed with almost 7,000 homes based on the zoning in the 1970s. The first glimmer of an idea for parkland in the hillsides may have come about when the Claraboya developers deeded to the city 40 acres, Sycamore Canyon, on the north side of the Thompson Creek Channel in exchange for higher density. The arrow on the left, that red arrow, points to Claraboya. The blue arrow on the right points to Sycamore Canyon, and the photo shows hikers enjoying Sycamore Canyon. The League of Women Voters played a pivotal role in moving the city to adopt regulations that would ultimately preserve hillside land. Their 1977 study, Claremont Hillside Development, looked at issues such as fire, water, seismic danger, and the costs and benefits of hillside development. It contained recommendations for the Planning Commission and the Council to consider. It cites pros and cons of each recommendation, pointing out that although hillside housing would generate tax revenue, the costs of providing services, police, fire, street cleaning, trash collection, and so forth, especially in the hillside area, would exceed those tax revenues. So the city would essentially be subsidizing the developments. In 1977, the city adopted a natural environment element of the general plan. It established the foundation for a hillside zoning ordinance that could protect large portions of hillside land. League members Judy Wright and Diane Ring played an important role then and in future years. Without the League's leadership, the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park might never have come into being. That photo on the left is from the League study, and that line is the National Forest boundary. The League's work stimulated creation of a task force made up of residents, realtors, members of local organizations, commissioners, and council members. They tried to balance, I think people need to know they should be on mute, just as a little aside there. They tried to balance environmental concerns, property owners' rights, and community values. At first, they considered simple slope density zoning. The zoning would allow more houses on flatter land and fewer houses on steeper, more remote land. However, it would have resulted in an enormous amount of grading to create streets like Clairvoyant's Mountain Avenue. So the city hired planning consultants, George Mader, known for skill in preserving hillside environments, and San Francisco attorney named Antonio Rossman to work with the task force. Rossman was able to make convincing and legally sound case for adapting a concept conceived for historic building preservation to land preservation. The result was adoption in 1981 of a groundbreaking hillside ordinance that contains a transfer of development credit scheme that allows houses to be built in certain cluster areas that are flatter and closer to roads and utilities, but also allows owners of land not in cluster areas to have the potential for some economic use of their land. Cities cannot simply zone away the value of a piece of land by, for example, designating it as open space. The ordinance, unsuccessfully fought by several opponents, was based on a concept that originated in New York City to preserve iconic Grand Central Station, which sat on land zoned for a skyscraper. Developers wanted to build a tall building on the site. Preservationists came up with the idea of having Grand Central sell its air rights, the right to build a very tall building, to a property elsewhere in Manhattan. This would enable the second owner to build a taller skyscraper than was allowed under its current zoning. The concept was legally challenged. The case went to the Supreme Court, and the validity of the transfer concept was established. And you see it in the sketch on the slide. With Rossman's guidance, Claremont adapted the concept, but referred to it as a transfer of development credit scheme to avoid implying that there was a right to build groups of houses on remote, steep land. Consultant George Mader studied every privately owned, undeveloped hillside parcel. Using topographic maps, he estimated the number of houses that could, in theory, but not in actuality, be built based on a slope density formula. The steeper the slopes and the further from road and utilities, the fewer the number of housing units or credits were assigned to that parcel. Housing could be built only in the flatter, less remote cluster areas shown on the map. And the map on the left slide has notes, all those little yellow things, indicating the number of development credits assigned to each parcel. And the map on the right shows the original clusters where houses could be built. The owner of a cluster area, after buying credits, could then build more houses pending city approval, including meeting general plan policies and environmental quality provisions and zoning requirements. The ultimate goal was for the credits from donor parcels to be legally and permanently extinguished and the parcels to remain as open space forever. This is a simple example of a parcel with, on the left, of 38 credits that is requesting 2 credits to build a total of 40 houses. So the owner buys 2 credits from a neighbor with 6 credits, leaving the neighbor with 4 and the parcel with 40. The ordinance has been used only once to create the neighborhood known as Stone Creek, shown in purple. Land owned by the Garner family, about 1,400 acres, was bequeathed to Pomona College by alumnus H.H. Garner in 1980. A dozen or so years later, negotiations between the city and the college resulted in development credits from 1,220 of Pomona College's acres being transferred to the cluster. The 1,220 acres became the beginning of the Wilderness Park. The cluster got an increase in density, which increased its value, and Pomona College was able to sell the cluster to a developer who built the houses you see north of Baldy Road at Padua Avenue. So now Lissa will go into detail about the negotiations with Pomona College, the beginning of the Wilderness Park, and later acquisitions.
Thanks, Arlene. I'd like to just start with some pictures to show you what the Wilderness Park looks like for those of you who maybe haven't been there. And you'll see why we love it, why we want to save it, and why we want to expand it. Okay, this is an aerial view that shows today what the urban wildland interface looks like. Laverne is on the left, and you can see that intense development up into the foothills in Laverne, and Claremont is on the right, and you can see the development Arlene was talking about running up to the northeast along Mount Baldy Road, as well as just the regular urban expansion in that area. Suburban sprawl could have been all over the foothills. I just want to repeat what Arlene said. All of the foothills were in private hands in 1974. All but 40 acres were still in private hands in 1994. Instead, here is what we have today. The lines you see are outlines of parcels that were added to wilderness parks in our area over the years. But let me orient you. The red arrow is pointing at Claraboya, and the green arrow is pointing at the entrance, the main entrance to the wilderness park at the northern end of Mills Avenue. And the 2,500 acres of the Claremont Wilderness Park are in green. LA County's Marshall Canyon Regional Park is in blue, and Clara Oaks, the parcel that we want to buy and add to the park, is in red, and we'll be talking about that later. Our long-range vision is to have the parkland across all of Claremont's foothills and extending westward to link scattered open spaces into a wildland corridor running along the face of the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains as far as Monrovia. And you can see here how already Claremont's park is connecting to the county land to the west. The next slide is showing you a table of the chronology of additions to the Claremont Park over the past 50 years. If you look, don't worry about all the details here, but if you look at the second column, you see a list of the 9 acquisitions that make up Claremont's park today. And if you skip to the source column, which is funding sources, you can see that there have been donations to the park, but much of the funding has come from state grants. Only one edition is from the mostly local funds, and that's the 2000 edition of Johnson's Pasture. And even it is not totally local, Claremont local funds. I'll give you a minute to look at the chart while I keep talking about it. It looked like there are just these neat logical steps from the vision to the reality of today's Claremont Hills Wilderness Park, but that's simply not the case. The vision, could you please mute your phone?
Now this one really looks like a volcano that's building. See it, huh?
Terry, I think you can mute folks, Terry, since you're host.
Oh, okay, sure. I think I can. Hang on.
That's great, thanks.
Well, I'll keep going while you're looking. It's just not the case that there was a neat logical progression from the vision of the park to the reality that we have today and the reality we hope to have in the future. The vision emerged over many years in fits and starts. As Arlene said, Sycamore Canyon on the eastern side of Claraboya became a park in 1975. The city council created this park, but most likely those council members expected that the rest of the foothills would be developed with homes in the future. That was what was happening in other communities along the foothills, and the foothills were still private, so they expected that. They made no plans for more parkland in the foothills other than Sycamore Canyon. In 1981, the City of Claremont adopted the new Hillsides Ordinance with development credits, as Arlene explained. And it opens people's minds to the vision of Claremont's hillsides remaining green, because the pockets of development would leave large swaths of natural open space. So with the ordinance in place, the next significant event was the opening of the original Claremont Hills Wilderness Park in 1997, and it was 1,220 acres. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. This is the 2001 map that Arlene showed you, and I just want to look at it in a little more detail here. The original park that was became the Wilderness Park is 1,220 acres. It's striped, so you can see that it's made up of a number of parcels, and they're fairly well connected to each other, but there are a lot of blank white parcels in between and among them, and those are all still in private hands. The dark gray areas, as Arlene said, are areas where there could be development. They're cluster areas. To orient you, Claraboya has the red arrow, and the main park entrance on Mills Avenue is marked with the green arrow, just to give you a sense of where you are. Okay, this is the loop trail where the blue arrow is. You can see a complete closed loop there from Cobalt Canyon on the right to Burbank Canyon on the left. And it's about 5 miles long, and it's mostly in the original Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. It begins right at the top of Mills Avenue where the green arrow is. The blue arrow shows the loop. And again, the red arrow shows Claraboya, just to get you oriented. Okay, today, the loop is very popular throughout the region. It's the main area of the park that most people know. So I want to talk now about how did the original park happen? Well, it took 8 years of deliberations with the city and the owner of the land, Pomona College, falling in and out of agreements. I just want to tell you about one breakthrough meeting. 2 Pomona College officials met with city manager Glenn Southard, Mayor Diane Ring, and Councilwoman Judy Wright. And as Arlene said, both Judy and Diane had been very active in the League of Women Voters. They were both presidents of the League, and they both worked on the 1977 Hillside Study. The initial assumption going into the meeting was that Pomona would develop the cluster area on the flat land along Mount Baldy Road, Stone Creek that Arlene talked about, and Pomona would donate the hillside land to a nature conservancy. The city's main concern was to prevent development in the hillsides. Suddenly, someone from the city in the middle of the meeting said, "Why don't we buy it?" And there was this long, stunned silence. But that's what they did. They agreed that the city would buy all the land from Pomona, sell the cluster to a developer, and retire the development credits on the hillside parcels. So the city started making monthly payments to Pomona College. And in the end, the city paid over $1 million. But with the economic downturn after a year or so, it couldn't afford to continue the payments and was in danger of defaulting. But thanks to the good relationships that had developed, Pomona agreed to let the city keep the hillside land in exchange for the city's help with the entitlement process and specific plan for the cluster area and for the hillside development credits, which the city transferred to Pomona's cluster. So that smoothed the way for Pomona to sell the cluster area property along Mount Baldy Road to a developer. And that is what Stone Creek today, with about 125 homes on it along Mount Baldy Road. So the vision of the city's negotiators, which started out being just to protect the hillsides, led them further. It led them to actually create the original wilderness park. Still, in the 1990s, there were large cluster areas for housing in the hillsides. Johnson's Pasture was the largest and the most vulnerable. By 1999, Johnson's Pasture faced a serious new threat of development. Its 180 acres in the cluster area could be developed with 125 to 250 houses.
Hang on.
No.
Lisa.
Pardon?
Never mind.
So in 2000, 3 women, local women, formed Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, or I'm going to just call it CWC. And their goal was to save Johnson's Pasture. And that was the only goal, to save Johnson's Pasture. And that was at a time when everyone expected it to be developed. One of the women was Suzanne Thompson, and she was the main leader of CWC for the first 10 years. She and the other founders made the organization a nonprofit, raised money, and recruited members. Crucially, they found a partner in the national nonprofit Trust for Public Land, which has an office in Pasadena. And CWC has been working with the Trust for Public Land ever since. In October 2003, as you can see from this front page of the Courier, the Padua wildfire swept through the foothills on Santa Ana winds. It destroyed 66 houses and damaged 23 more in Claremont alone. This reminded everyone of the hazards of developing in the foothills. And it really didn't deter the city, which now had a wilderness park and wanted it to grow. So in 2003 and 2004, the city added 3 more parcels to the park: Noland, CMC, and Wang, and they're marked there with those green arrows. The light gray parcels here were all still private, and the black area is the original wilderness park. How did the city do this? Well, with the city council's strong backing, city manager Glenn Southard deputized his young assistant, Jim Lewis, who's now the city manager in Pismo Beach, to work with CWC and the Trust for Public Land to buy up more parcels. Jim and the Trust for Public Land project manager went out and negotiated deals with 3 willing sellers. They tried to get more, but they just had these 3. And they secured state funds for the purchases, and they bought these properties. By now, the vision of a grand wilderness park over much of Claremont's hillsides was becoming the reality. On this slide, The next prize was Johnson's Pasture, which became part of the park in 2007. And the blue arrow shows you where it is. And below it is Clairvoyant. Okay, you can see why it's so special. Here are some of the eucalyptus trees that were planted by the Johnson family's friends in the first half of the 1900s. C.C. and Louisa Johnson were the original owners, as Arlene said, and the pasture's namesakes. Well, in 1950, Louisa died, and the land was sold to the Musgrove brothers for $750,000. In 1960, they sold the lower slopes to the developers of Clairvoyant. Johnson's Pasture, as Arlene said, was to be Clairvoyant 2. If you look at the map, you can see why. The blue rectangle is just above. Below it is Clairvoyant, and this would just continue Clairvoyant up into the foothills. Well, a merciful bankruptcy prevented that from happening in the 1970s. Then 3 developers failed to overturn the transfer of development credits provision in the city's ordinance in the 1980s. But by 1999, with a strong economy, another developer was seriously interested in developing Johnson's Pasture. It is the only parcel today that is mostly paid for by Claremont taxpayers, almost totally paid for by taxpayers. Success in saving it was the result of 2 intense political campaigns in 2006. The land was originally appraised at $12 million. At first, city council and voters all wanted to save Johnson's Pasture, but they disagreed on how to pay for it. The council was split, voters were split. Should they go with a parcel tax or a bond measure? A parcel tax requires a majority vote. A bond measure requires 2/3. So the council voted to go out for a parcel tax in June 2006, and it failed miserably. 55% of voters opposed it and only 44% favored it. But the opponents still claimed that they wanted to buy Johnson's Pasture, they just didn't like the financing method. So right after the loss, the voters and council members, liberals and conservatives, all came together to buy Johnson's Pasture with a general obligation bond. And they put it on the November ballot. CWC and some city council members and many community members organized an all-out campaign called Yes on Measure S. On the committee of 25, 9 were CWC board members. Next slide, please. To show you what that campaign was like, college students made t-shirts, which the 2 hikers here are wearing. Supporters posted yard signs. Artists held benefit shows. CWC circulated brochures like this one. Supporters sent mailers, walked door to door, lobbied at grocery stores, gave talks, wrote letters to the editor, became poll watchers, drove voters to the polls. College students convinced friends to register to vote in Claremont and to get out and vote. CWC board members made $1,000 pledges. At one point, they even delivered a wagon load of letters to the city council at a council meeting. Well, the result was 72% voted yes. We saved Johnson's Pasture. And on the front page of the Courier, that's Suzanne Thompson, president of CWC and co-chair of the Yes on Measure S campaign. The 2 secrets of success were that we had no organized opposition. The campaign included everyone, and Johnson's Pasture really is the well-loved crown jewel of the hillsides that the campaign had always claimed it was. Moving on, in 2010 and 11, Trust for Public Land and CWC worked with the city to acquire Gale Ranch with state grant funding. The arrow shows you where Gale Ranch is. And the 2 state agencies agreed to split the cost of $4.8 million. The Gale Ranch is strategically located between Johnson's Pasture and the entrance to the Wilderness Park on Mills. And the Gale family that ran the Angora Goat Ranch had owned it for over 100 years, but they'd sold it in 1984, and it was sold one more time before becoming part of the park. Now I want to detour just a bit and talk about the master plan. From 2013 to 2016, the city developed its Hillsides master plan with a lot of support from Claremont Wildlands Conservancy. Well, why? Why do this? By 2013, the park's popularity had exploded with a little help from Yelp. Estimates were over 320,000 visits a year. Neighbors became concerned about noise, traffic, parking, pedestrian safety, trash. The city council expanded the parking lots and added fees for parking in 2013. And it responded to complaints as they arose by instituting residential permit parking on one street after another. But this was all a kind of piecemeal reactive approach. So instead, Claremont Wildlands Conservancy urged the council to create a master plan for overall good management of the park, taking into consideration neighbors' needs, but not having that be the exclusive focus. There were three goals for the master plan. First, to preserve the park as an environmental resource. Second, to provide passive recreation for visitors. And third, to minimize the impact on neighbors. After extensive community involvement over a couple of years, the City Council adopted the Hillsides Master Plan in 2016. And one result is that the city now has a robust ranger program and a loyal volunteer group called Friends of the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. Trust for Public Land calls our park one of the best managed parks in the San Gabriels. Okay, the final two additions to the park were donations. The first was the 463 acres of Evie Canyon in 2017. If you see that green arrow, it's pointing to the green parcels. All those parcels make up Evie Canyon. Pomona College saw how well managed and safe from the development the park was, so it donated those Evie Canyon parcels. On this map, oops, sorry, can you go back to the map, Terry? On this map, you can see almost all of the park as it is today. The yellow is the original park, 1,220 acres from 1996. The tan stripes are the parcels that were added from 2003 to 2011. And the blank white areas are parcels that are still in private hands. I just want you to see a few pictures of Evie Canyon so you can see what a gift it is to all of us. Okay, and finally, in 2020, the Bertolina family donated their 20 acres adjacent to Johnson's Pasture to the park. That red arrow shows that little parcel there. CWC worked very closely with the family and the city and even contributed to the closing costs. This parcel forms a bridge to the wildland corridor to the west. And just to remind you, CWC's vision today is to include all 3,100 acres of Claremont's park in the wilderness, Claremont's foothills in the wilderness park, and to connect the park to a continuous wildland corridor to the west. So this little bridge is very important. Clara Oaks is in pink on this map, and it helps extend that bridge to LA County parklands. The white parcels above and below it are still privately owned, and Terry is now going to tell you all about this.
Thank you, Lisa. So in 2016, Randy Lim, who is a Canadian developer, he has investors from China. They purchased 103 acres in this parcel. They called it Clara Oaks, and they planned to build between 40 to 47 luxury homes. 2 years later, in the spring of 2018, after 2 years of planning and a Claremont community meeting that was very actively attended, Randy called Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, called Lissa, and offered to sell the land. He had decided that it really was going to be a better investment to put that money elsewhere, but he needed to get his money out. So we enlisted the help, once again, of the Trust for Public Land. And in August of 2018, that land was appraised. So it's a common practice when you're in a situation like this to get a third-party appraisal. And at that time, it was appraised for $7.2 million. And at that time, Randy felt that this fair market value would work for him. It's really important to know that as the property gets entitled and the ability to develop becomes more possible, the value of that land goes up. And if it were fully entitled, we expect that the value of the property would be about 15 million. So we met with Hilda Solis, at the time, our county supervisor, and we talked with her about gaining county funds. And after talking with her, it became really apparent that it was going to be a really big challenge. And so in the summer of 2019, we let Randy know that we knew it was going to be a challenging effort, and he felt that he needed to start the environmental impact process. So now Randy's trying to get entitlement so that he can develop it and get his money out, while we're trying to raise funds to purchase it. It's his fallback position, basically. The next few maps are from the Clara Oaks Specific Plan Project Initial Study. So this is available on the California Environmental Quality Act, the CEQA website. So you can see the kinds of papers that are being filed. So you see the red Clara Oaks property. Interestingly, this reveals some of the important characteristics of this property. First of all, it is in the headwaters of the San Gabriel River, specifically the Upper San Jose Creek sub-watershed are on this property, or is on this property. The black diagonal lines indicate that this property is in a very high fire hazard severity zone. So it's interesting, the CEQA process requires that a number of California departments, interested departments, comment on any project that's going through this process. And under fire, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife says, the project has a potential to impact open space and natural habitat by increasing fire frequency and severity, as well as requiring fuel modification zones that could result in additional loss of open space and natural habitat beyond the development footprint. So that's the California Department of Fish and Wildlife assessment. But let's look at some history of fire. So this particular map shows a fire. There are 3 fires in a row. So you'll see this fire, you'll see the next fire, you'll see the fire after that. And finally, when you overlay all these fires, what you realize is that in fact, Clara Oaks has been in all 3 of them. And actually it's been in 7 of the past fires. Definitely a high fire severity zone. Now we could go on and on about why this property should not be developed, but I would rather focus on why the property should be preserved. But before I do that, there's one more element. So this shows the property as it was planned to be developed. So you can see the 3 roads coming off Webb Canyon Road and creating the entrance and exit for the people living in this 40 to 47 housing development. But when I drove up Webb Canyon Road a week ago or 2 weeks ago, The first sign you see looks at, explains that it's a fire hazard zone. Then it said it's in a flood zone. Then it says it's a really narrow road, watch for oncoming traffic. Then you can see a very narrow bridge that's on private property. And finally, some beautiful oaks that we in California are trying to preserve. So the end of why we should not. Now let's look at preservation. I think the most impact comes from considering the wildlife that calls this land home. And Professor Paul Faustich has wonderful motion activated cameras that he's set up on this site. And you can see these animals that were captured as they walk by these cameras. So you can see, of course, deer, but I love this bear enjoying walking in the water of the river. We have a woodpecker and then a beautiful profile of a bobcat. So these animals are all supported by the vegetation and the terrain of Clara Oaks. And this property, if we're able to purchase it, would become part of the Wilderness Park. And the Wilderness Park hosts not just animals like this, but hosts a wide variety of humans. So let's talk about the humans that enjoy the park. When the master plan was being developed, there were some surveys done throughout the Wilderness Park. And what we discovered was that people were coming from all over the area. In fact, over 80% of the people visiting the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park came from outside of Claremont. And so what you can see on this chart are the zip codes, the name of the city, and then the percentage, the number of visitors and the percentage. And you'll see all the people and where they come from that enjoy the park. It's also interesting to note, and it's important when we're applying for various grants, that many of these communities are quite park poor. And the red indicates disadvantaged communities or areas of communities that are disadvantaged. The green is the Wilderness Park, and the blue star is the Clara Oaks property. So it really comes down to fundraising. That we could create a western entrance to the park, and we could preserve this beautiful land and wildlife, protect the headwaters, create this corridor that's our vision, and expand our wilderness park. But it comes down to knowing where to go to get funds. So the Trust for Public Land has expertise in submitting grant applications, and they're able to do it for both state and county agencies, and they have a lot of experience at doing this. But almost every one of these grants wants to see matching funds. And when we started applying, the city was not in a position to supply any matching funds whatsoever. And yet we still needed to show that we had community support. There are a number of sources of funds, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But a very short period of time ago, the city of Claremont allocated $300,000 to park expansion when the city realized that the budget was not as severely depleted as we expected it to be a year ago when we were all dealing with the beginning of COVID. So now we have an opportunity to say that the city will support with a certain amount of funds, not a lot, but it's something. But the most important thing that we have been able to do and that we're continuing to do is truly show grassroots community support. So some of you may recognize that on the left-hand side of the page is an example of a flyer that we put in the Courier, and we've run ads in the Courier. We have a couple of posters that you might have seen if you've walked in the Wilderness Park or been at the farmer's market, and we have volunteers that are standing by these posters explaining our need for community support. You can even see, if you've been by the Folk Music Center, a spontaneous retail windows display that was put up to support this effort, and this really beautiful t-shirt that you can get too if you donate $50 or more. And what we're finding is that people really are responding to this. And it's really important to understand that these granting agencies really understand that these donations are after tax dollars. It's $20 here, $50 there, maybe $100, a few big donors, but this is community showing support for the expansion of this park. So it's very meaningful. So we had funds, we still have them. We have funds, we pledged them $75,000, which is the bulk of our assets. We pledged those, and then we said to the community, please try to match our funds. And we're so happy. This is where we are as of this weekend. We have 193,000, over 193,000 in combined pledges and donations from the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy and the rest of the community. And we're hoping to get this over 200,000 or more. The more we show support, the better our chances are of getting funding from other agencies. So let's talk about where we could possibly get anywhere close to the $7.2 million originally appraised value. And I really need to say that we don't know what the value will be. We're going to have to get it reappraised. So good news, you may have already heard this, but we attended a Rivers and Mountains Conservancy meeting last week, and the board approved $3 million. After Senator Portantino showed up at the meeting virtually and implored the board to provide this funding. So he was very much in favor of this. The money came from money that he secured for open space, and he's quite pleased with this, and so are we. It becomes a foundation, it becomes a magnet to help us attract additional funds. I'm sure any of you who've been involved in raising funds know that once someone has put some money in, it's a lot easier for other agencies to feel, well, if they're willing to put in $3 million, we'll put our $1 million in, or our $2 million in. So we're very hopeful. We have one grant that we should hear about this week or next week at the latest, which is an environmental mitigation grant for $1 million. We have a grant in place with the Los Angeles County Measure A that we should hear about sometime this spring. It's so hard to wait to hear these results. And then I mentioned the wonderful news that the city is willing to contribute $300,000 for park expansion, and then the donations that have been made by Claremont Wildlands Conservancy and the community. So we really intend, through these talks, through advertisements, through posters, through volunteers, to continue to work diligently with the help of the Trust for Public Land to be able to purchase the land and add it to the park. So please spread the word. If you know people that would, gosh, if they would like to go for a walk in the park with us, we're happy to take you. If somebody wants a sneak peek at Clara Oaks, we could probably arrange that. And what we really want to do is look forward to having you all join us at the ribbon cutting when we finally purchase this land and add it to the Wilderness Park. And now we're available to answer questions.
All right, well, thank you all so much for that great presentation. So much information packed in there. Brian asked in the comments if there's a chance of getting the PowerPoint presentation, maybe through an email from one of you. And I think I have Brian's email in my contacts somewhere, so I can forward that to one or the three of you.
Yeah, forward contact information. It's a huge file. We'll save it as a PDF.
Okay, great. And then, so Terry, I've got a quick question to get us started. And please, if anyone else has questions, go ahead and either raise your hand or write them in the chat box. So for folks who want to help, obviously they can donate, and I put the link to that in the chat box. So that would be great if people could help support. And then what else can we do? Do you want us reaching out to Portantino again? Do you want to run into the folk music center and buy a shirt? All of the above? How can we sort of leverage our impact the most? Just spreading the word? Is that?
I think right now, spreading the word. And if you are members of other organizations or have links to private foundations that might have funds that they would like to contribute, that would be really helpful. And if you join our mailing list, and you can do that by going to our website, and I think I have the website right there, ClaremontWildlands.org. Then when the time comes that we need voices or we need letters written, we can let you know, because we can say, oh, now's the time to send letters to Assembly Member Chris Holden, or now's the time to send letters to Senator Portantino, or possibly to Catherine Barger, our new county supervisor. So I think there will be opportunities where the community's voice will be very powerful. So we'll let you know, join our email.
Okay, great. And oh, sorry.
I'd just like to add something, Stuart, that Sustainable Claremont has been very helpful. The 3 grants that Terry showed, we grant proposals and hearing from grantors takes forever. We wrote the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy grant last January, the California Natural Resources Agency grant in March, and we wrote the Measure A one in October. All of these mainly with a tremendous amount of work by Trust for Public Land, by the way. And we don't hear for months and months and months what the result is, but I want you to know that Sustainable Claremont did write support letters as an organization to help with all those grants. And for those grants, we had like 15 organizations writing letters of support, and those letters of support are tremendously helpful. So something else that can be useful is if we do write some more grants, if we need to write more grants, to have, if people have connections with other organizations that could write letters of support, that would be very helpful.
And Lissa, if somebody does have that, works for an organization or runs one that could be used to leverage, greater support, who should they get in contact with? Should they contact you through the website? Should they email you directly? What's the best way for people to connect?
I think the best way is just through the website. You're perfectly willing to contact us individually, but I think the website's probably the best. Arlene, you're on mute. Do you have an idea? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you see me? Because
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, because I was trying to fix something and I cannot see you. So I'm just gonna hold down the bar here and answer. So I've been desperately trying to get back in so I can see you. It's just a launch meeting screen, so I apologize. What did you ask me?
People were wondering how to get in touch with us, and I'm thinking that the website's probably the best way. But all 3 of us are happy to answer emails and stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Oh yes, of course. Yes.
And then Terry, it sounds like you all are going to be hitting a number of other organizations giving presentations. Can you give us maybe what you have planned or who you're talking to next? That way, if people want to spread the word, if they couldn't make it tonight or had to duck out early, we'll be sharing the YouTube recording of this hopefully tomorrow on social and then on our website. But for people who want to attend live and maybe ask questions, where else can they find you?
Let's see. We're doing a presentation on Thursday evening at 7 for Claremont Heritage. And I'm going to need some help with, we're talking to Rotary.
Yeah, we're doing Active Claremont on February 17th at 7 p.m. We're doing Rotary on March 4th. We're doing
At 1 o'clock.
at 1 p.m. Then it's the noon Rotary. Thank you. And then at 7 p.m. on March 14th, Laverne Historical Society, and it'll be a larger group than that. And then we don't have a definite date yet in April for University Club, but that'll be on a Tuesday at noon. in
We
April.
also have Friday, the 18th, Meg Mathias is going to do a presentation at the Democratic Club with this information that we've given you tonight.
If
Somebody
other
just
people have
wrote-
organizations that they think would enjoy this presentation and could spread the word, let us know, because we're happy to meet and do this again.
I just saw a question about, yes, Claremont Wildlands Conservancy is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And the best way to donate is through our website. It'll give you information if you want to mail a check or if you want to just donate online.
Right here at the bottom of the slide.
Lisa, this is Brian. The same presentation, is this the same one you're going to be doing for Active Claremont?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was. I just wanted to make sure because we want to get the word out because we allow everybody to come on to our membership and join in. So I want to be able to put the word out that way.
Right.
Thank you.
That's great, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. And also Stuart.
Hi,
thank you.
Arlene. I just thought I'd say hi. Arlene and I used to work together.
We work together in Laverne.
And it's really helpful that you're recording this, Stuart, and that other people can see it on YouTube. So you don't mind if we give your link to people with questions, right?
Of course not. Yeah, and I'll share that to you as soon as we upload it. Usually they send us a file pretty soon after we're done recording. And once I get that on the website, I'll share that with you all. I have two other really quick questions. I know we're over our time, but if we could, just two last questions would be great. One was from Vanita Pugol, who's on Sustainable Claremont's board, and she asks, or she says, thanks for the great presentation, what you all do. Is there a consideration for a visitor center at the park that can help promote the mission, fundraising, sell merchandise? Or is there an annual Claremont Wilderness Day for a community engagement event? Or are there other methods that you're trying to do for this type of outreach where we can maybe meet on site?
Yeah, the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park is not ours. The Claremont Hills Wilderness Park is property of the City of Claremont. There's an organization called Friends of the Wilderness Park, and they are in the process of erecting a kiosk at the very beginning entrance to the park. And on the kiosk will be information about the Wilderness Park and the wildlife at the park. So if you're interested in the park itself and all the goings on there, the Friends of the Wilderness Park would be great to join. They have their own website. There is no plan other than that for a visitor center, but the kiosk will be a place where rangers can give talks, where information can be posted. We do put our posters at the entrance asking for donations and at the farmers market. And then if you really want to stay in touch with us, the best way is through our email list and our newsletter.
Okay, great. And then the final question from Richard.
I just wanted to add one thing there. We will, if COVID lets us, we will definitely be at Earth Day and 4th of July booths. And the fundraising we're doing is going to go on for a number of months. We're not there yet, as you can tell. So
Okay,
we will
great.
be doing that.
Fingers crossed for those in-person events. And then
Let me
a
say
question.
one more thing, Stuart. We
Yeah,
also
sure.
have a bunch of committees that are involved in all sorts of activities. So if you're interested in joining us and serving on a committee, we have all sorts of fun things going on. And just get in touch with us through the website and we'll see if we can find a place where you really feel that your passion can be expressed.
Yes.
All right, great. And then the final question from Dick Haskell is there any chance that the limited road access could turn to be a major obstacle for development?
In a nutshell, yes. The city is in the entitlement process with the developer, and that's why we started out the process of trying to raise the money to buy Clara Oaks after it was offered to us, with the city as our major partner. And the city had to pull out of the process because once the developer entered the entitlement process in August of 2019, the city has to be neutral. So that's one of the problems with the earlier question too. The city can't be supporting this effort in any overt way because it's in the entitlement process with the developer. But yes, the city is working, and the county, because Webb Canyon Road is both in the city and the county. And part of the EIR process is to look at Webb Canyon Road, fire danger, all the kinds of obstacles, but also all the benefits there could be for the developer.
All right. Well, Lissa, Arlene, Terry, thank you all so much for giving us that great presentation and opening our eyes to all the great work that's being done. And we'll be sure to share all this information and spread the word and try to raise that money to protect this amazing resource that we have for all of us to enjoy. So thank you all again. Big round of applause for our great presentation. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night. So
Yeah,
everyone,
thank you for
take care,
inviting us.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.